There are moments that slice your life in two. There is the before, a landscape of memories you once thought were solid ground, and the after, a cratered wasteland where nothing looks the same. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, 72 floors above the glittering chaos of New York City, at a restaurant called The Summit. A fitting name, I suppose, for a place where you can see how far you have to fall. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, and I am, or was, a mother. I don't mean in the biological sense. That part is a fact, recorded on a birth certificate somewhere. I mean in the way that it becomes your profession, your identity, the sun your entire world revolves around. For 30 years, my son Mason was my son. I was the planet, content in my steady, predictable orbit, providing the gravity that held his world together. I thought that was a law of nature. I was about to learn that some laws can be broken. I felt out of place the moment I walked in. The summit was a universe of quiet confidence and expensive perfume. Waiters moved like shadows, and the clinking of glasses was a delicate symphony. My dress, a deep plum silk I'd bought for a conference 10 years ago, felt like a relic from another era. It was elegant, but it remembered a different life. A life of academic achievement and quiet evenings with my late husband, David. A life before I became a full-time investor in a dream. Mason and his fiancée, Olivia, were already at the table. They looked like they'd been sculpted from the very marble and glass that surrounded us. Mason, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, had the sharp, restless energy of a man who outruns the future. Olivia, a vision in a cream-colored dress, was all polished surfaces, her hair, her nails, her smile. They were a matched set, gleaming and new. "Mom, you made it," Mason said, standing to give me a kiss that barely brushed my cheek. It was a gesture of obligation, not affection. "You both look wonderful," I said, and I meant it. My pride in him was a physical thing, a constant warmth in my chest. "This place is breathtaking." "Only the best for our big news," Olivia chirped, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. There was a distance in them, a cool pane of glass between us. The small talk that followed felt scripted. They asked about my week in the way you ask a stranger about the weather, a necessary courtesy before getting to the real business. I felt a familiar pang, a quiet loneliness that had become my constant companion since David passed, but I pushed it down. Tonight was a celebration. Tonight was about Mason. The appetizer arrived, a delicate tower of tuna tartare I was afraid to touch. Then Mason cleared his throat, placing his hands flat on the table. "So, the reason we wanted you here tonight," he began, a rare, genuine smile finally breaking through his composed exterior. "The deal is done. Aura Health is being acquired by Gen Pharma. $200 million. The number hung in the air, impossibly large, shimmering like the city lights outside. 200 million. The air left my lungs in a rush, and for the first time all evening, the chill I'd been feeling was replaced by an overwhelming tidal wave of joy. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and immediate. "Oh, Mason," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. That's incredible." In that moment, I wasn't in a skyscraper restaurant. I was back in the cluttered office of my old house, signing the papers to sell the home my parents had left me. I was at the bank, watching the teller's face as I drained my entire retirement account, the sum of 35 years of work. I saw the sleepless nights, the relentless worry, the quiet prayers whispered into the darkness. Nearly $1 million of my past, my security, my entire life, poured into his dream. It wasn't an investment on paper. It was a pact made of love, a mother's blind, beautiful faith. "We did it, Mom," he said, and the "we" was the most beautiful word I had ever heard. But then the temperature in the room dropped again. The shift was subtle at first. Olivia placed her hand on Mason's arm, a silent signal. Her smile softened into something that looked dangerously like pity. "Mom," she said, her voice a gentle murmur, "with this big change, we've been looking at the finances, planning for the future. And well, the apartment you're in is a significant expense." I blinked, confused. The apartment David and I had shared for 20 years? The place I'd planned to live out the rest of my days? It's my home." Mason leaned forward, his celebratory warmth gone, replaced by the cool, pragmatic tone of a CEO. "We've found a wonderful senior living community for you just outside the city, in New Jersey. It's safe, quiet, and more importantly, more cost-effective. We need to start cutting unnecessary expenses to finalize the next phase of our plan. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. Unnecessary expenses. Was that what I was? A line item on a spreadsheet? My voice was a thread. Cut expenses, but what about my part of the company? My investment? I was your first investor, Mason. He laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a short, hollow burst of air, completely devoid of warmth. A sound that cracked the foundation of my world. Mom, please, he said, his voice laced with the kind of condescending patience you'd use on a child. That was money you gave me. It was a gift. There were no papers, no contracts. You don't understand how these things work. Just think of this as our way of taking care of you now, making sure you're settled. Olivia added, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "We just know what's best for you, Evelyn." They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, as if I were a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the new decor, a liability to be managed. This celebratory dinner wasn't a celebration at all. It was an eviction notice served with a side of tuna tartare. I sat there, frozen, 72 floors above a world that suddenly felt alien. The city lights blurred through my tears, a galaxy of shattered stars. I had given up my career, my financial future, and the last remnants of my own life to build his dream. And in return, I had just been informed that I was, in the final accounting, simply an unnecessary expense. My heart didn't just break. It atomized, turning to dust in the cold, thin air of the summit. The world continued around me. I could hear the distant sound of a fork scraping against a plate, the murmur of a toast being made at a nearby table. Time, for everyone else, was still moving forward, but for me it had stopped. I was encased in the amber of Mason's cold, hollow laugh. I don't remember deciding to leave. My body simply took over, a machine running on fumes. I pushed my chair back, the sound a screech against the polished floor, and stood. Mason and Olivia looked up, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Surprise? In their eyes. They had expected me to sit there and absorb the blow, to nod politely and finish my dessert. They had expected the mother they had always known, the one who smoothed over conflict and swallowed her own needs. They didn't seem to recognize the woman who was now walking away from their table without a word, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of the life she had built for them. The Uber ride home was a silent film played behind glass. The city lights, which had looked like a galaxy of promise an hour ago, now smeared across the window like cold, indifferent tears. The driver tried to make small talk, something about the traffic on the FDR drive, but my silence was a wall he couldn't breach. I stared out at the blur of yellow cabs and neon signs, my son's words replaying in a relentless loop. Unnecessary expense. You don't understand business. A gift. A gift is given from the heart, freely and without expectation. What I had given him wasn't a gift, it was a transplant. I had carved out pieces of myself, my security, my heritage, my future, and grafted them onto his so that he might have a stronger life. And now, he was telling me the body was rejecting the donor. The key felt heavy in my hand as I stood before the door of my apartment, my home. The word itself felt like a lie now. When the door swung open, the familiar scent of old books and the lemon polish I used on the mahogany console table greeted me. For a moment, it was a comfort, a whisper of normalcy. But it was fleeting. I stepped inside and the apartment felt vast and alien, a stage set for a play whose lead actress had just been written out of the script. I walked through the rooms as if I were a ghost. Here was the living room, with the worn spot on the Persian rug where Mason had spent hours building elaborate Lego castles. I saw the faint, almost invisible dent in the plaster near the bookcase, the result of an errant toy truck and a fit of toddler giggles. I remembered that day clearly. I had been on a deadline for a research grant proposal, one that could have led to a fellowship at Cambridge. But Mason had a fever, and he only wanted his mom to play with him. I had pushed the papers aside, built a fortress of pillows, and listened to him laugh. I never regretted it, not until now. Now, I saw it not as a choice made from love, but as a sacrifice entered into a ledger I didn't know we were keeping. In my study, my eyes fell on the empty space on the third shelf. It used to hold my father's collection of first edition Hemingways. They were his most prized possessions, smelling of aged paper and pipe tobacco. I had sold them. I had sold them, along with my parents' house on the Cape, the house with the creaky porch swing and the climbing roses my mother had babied for 40 years, to provide the second round of seed money for Aura Health. I could still feel the cold weight of the auctioneer's gavel in my memory, a final, definitive thud that severed the last physical link to my own parents. I did it because Mason had said, "This is it, Mom. This is the final push. I can feel it." His dream had required the sacrifice of my history. The entire apartment was a museum of my devotion. The kitchen where I'd cooked him, brain food before every exam, the photos lining the hallway that chronicled his life, not mine. In every photo, I was the one behind the camera, the silent, invisible architect of his triumphs. There was Mason at his fifth grade science fair, beaming next to a papier-mâché volcano I had stayed up until 3 a.m., helping him paint. There he was in his high school graduation gown, the tassel swinging. There he was, holding his diploma from Stanford, an education I was still paying off. I stood before that wall of images and felt a profound, chilling clarity. It wasn't just that they wanted me to move. It wasn't just about money. They were clearing out the archives. Mason was stepping into a new life, a $200 million life. And that life had no room for the woman who knew he was afraid of the dark until he was 10, the one who knew his favorite meal was the simple meatloaf she made, not the foie gras he now ordered without a thought. His past, his humble beginnings, my unending sacrifice, all of it was an inconvenient truth, an unnecessary expense. I sank onto the sofa, the plush velvet suddenly cold and unwelcoming. For 30 years, my purpose had been clear: to raise Mason, to support him, to be the constant, unwavering foundation upon which he could build his life. I had done it. I had succeeded beyond my wildest imaginings. And my reward? A quiet room in a facility in New Jersey, a place for inconvenient mothers and unnecessary expenses. The celebration was over. The truth had been served. And as the city hummed on outside my window, I was utterly, terrifyingly alone in a home that no longer felt like mine. Sleep is a country I could not enter. The night draped itself over the city, but in my apartment the darkness was absolute, broken only by the cold digital red of the alarm clock. 1:17 a.m., then 2:43 a.m., then 3:58 a.m. Each passing minute was a small stone dropped into the silent, deep well of my grief. I lay on my back, staring at a ceiling I could not see, my body rigid, my mind a frantic archaeologist, digging through the ruins of the last 24 hours, searching for a reason. Betrayal isn't a single, clean shot. It's a slow-acting poison. You can live with it for years, unaware, feeling only a vague malaise, a sense of things being slightly off-kilter. Then, one day, the diagnosis comes, and you look back and see the symptoms were there all along. The invisible cracks that have been spreading beneath the surface, waiting for the one final blow that would shatter everything. I needed to see the cracks. As a scientist, my life had been dedicated to finding patterns, to understanding cause and effect. I couldn't accept that the son I had raised had simply vanished overnight, replaced by that cold stranger at the restaurant. Something had to have led to this. There had to be a map of the decay. With a resolve that felt foreign to my grief-stricken limbs, I swung my legs off the bed. The wooden floor was cold against my bare feet. I walked into my study, the room where David had read his papers and where I had graded exams, and sat down in front of my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a ghostly blue light across my face. Where do you begin when searching for the moment love began to curdle? I started with my own emails. I typed Mason's name into the search bar. A decade of my life appeared in a scrolling list. Thinking of you? So proud of your presentation today. Don't forget to eat a real meal. Not just coffee. Attached to them were bank transfer confirmations, receipts for tuition payments, links to articles I thought would interest him. It was a one-sided conversation of relentless, cheerful support, a monument to my own blindness. This was my story, not his. To find his, I had to look elsewhere. I remembered the family cloud account I had set up years ago, a digital shoebox for photos and videos. I rarely used it, but I knew Mason and Olivia did. I logged in. At first, it was just a sea of bright, happy images. Trips they'd taken, parties with friends, engagement photos where they looked like a magazine advertisement for happiness. I was a phantom in this world, my presence marked only by a few comments I'd left. You two look so happy. What a beautiful place. Then I saw it, a photo from last Christmas. The three of us were standing by the tree in my living room. I was in the middle, beaming my arms around both of them. Mason had posted it with the caption, "Holiday time with the family." Benign, but below it, in a reply visible to our small family group, Olivia had written, "Your mom is the sweetest, so glad we could make time for her." Make time for her, as if I were a charity case, a box to be ticked on their holiday to-do list. I felt a prickle of cold. It wasn't cruel, not overtly, but it was condescending. It was the language of an outsider. That single comment was the thread. I started pulling on it. I remembered the old iPad I had bought Mason for his first year of college. It was ancient by tech standards now, but I knew he kept it in his old room here, sometimes using it when he visited. I walked into his room, more a shrine to his childhood than a guest room, and found it in a desk drawer. My hands trembled as I plugged it in. I felt like a trespasser, a spy in the house of my own heart. But the need to understand was a physical hunger now, overriding everything else. The battery was dead, but after a few minutes the screen flickered to life, and with it his entire world. He had never bothered to log out. His iMessages were all there, a river of his real life, synced and stored. My breath hitched. I found his conversation thread with Olivia. I scrolled back, a year, 18 months, 2 years, and I began to read. I saw the truth in cold, blue and gray bubbles. April 2 years ago, around the time I sold the house. Olivia, did you talk to your mom about the second funding round? Mason, doing it tonight. It's the house money. Olivia, is she going to be okay with it? It's a lot. Mason, she'll be fine. She doesn't really get the specifics of burn rate or valuation. I just tell her it's to keep the dream alive. It's simpler that way. Simpler that way. My complex grief and sacrifice reduced to a simple transaction he could manage. September. Last year, Olivia, we should probably have your mom over for dinner this week. We haven't seen her in a while. Mason, God, I'm so swamped. Can we push it? I don't have the energy for the whole life story catch-up. Olivia, just an hour, we have to make an appearance. Make an appearance like a duty, a chore. My blood ran cold as I scrolled closer to the present. The messages became more calculated. They discussed me the way a corporate team discusses a difficult but necessary asset. 3 months ago. Olivia, we need to start thinking about what happens post-acquisition. Your mom's apartment is a huge cash drain. Mason, I know, I'll handle it. She's emotional. We have to frame it as being for her own good, the less for you to worry about angle. Olivia, you think she'll buy it? Mason, she's my mom. She'll always believe I have her best interests at heart. The final messages from the week before the dinner were the ones that broke me. Olivia, so the plan is still on for Tuesday? We tell her about the acquisition and then the move. Mason, yes, rip the band-aid off. Celebrate the win, then present the solution. She'll be so happy about the money, she'll be more agreeable. We just have to manage her. Manage her? I closed the iPad. The screen went dark, but the words were burned onto the back of my eyelids. This wasn't a sudden, shocking betrayal. It was a slow, calculated erosion. For years, they had been chipping away at my worth, viewing me not as a person, but as a resource, then an obligation, and finally, a problem to be solved. The shock that had frozen me at the restaurant began to thaw, melting away into something else, something hot and sharp. The quiet grief in my heart was hardening, crystallizing into a cold, diamond-hard fury. They hadn't just misjudged my role in their lives, they had fundamentally misunderstood who I was, and they were about to find out how badly they had miscalculated. The anger did not burn hot. It was a glacial fire, a cold, clear flame that consumed the last of my shock and grief, leaving behind something hard and pure, resolve. For years, I had moved through my own home with the quiet deference of a guest. I had kept things the way Mason liked them, bought the brand of coffee he preferred, and arranged my life around the gravitational pull of his needs. No more. The sun had not yet risen, but my day had begun. I didn't return to bed. Instead, I walked to the hall closet and pulled out a stack of empty cardboard boxes. If they wanted me gone, I would go. But I would not be moved like a piece of furniture. I would leave as a queen abdicating a throne she no longer wanted. The act of packing was methodical, almost surgical. I was not preserving memories, I was performing an exorcism. I took down the photos from the hallway first. Each frame held a version of a boy I no longer knew and a woman I no longer was. I wrapped them in newspaper, the headlines of other people's lives cushioning the images of my own, and placed them in a box I labeled simply his. I cleared the bookshelves of his old textbooks, the mantelpiece of his sports trophies, the kitchen cabinet of the garish superhero mug he still drank from when he visited. With each item I packed away, I felt a little lighter, as if I were shedding a heavy, invisible coat. It was in the back of his childhood closet, behind a forgotten tennis racket and a box of old video games that I found it. A sturdy, cedar-lined storage box. David's box. It held the few things he'd kept from his own father, a tarnished silver watch, a handful of medals from his service, a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. My first instinct was to close the lid, to leave the past undisturbed. My grief over David was a quiet, settled thing, a room in my heart I kept locked. But something made me pause, a sense of duty, perhaps, a need to properly sort his legacy before I abandoned this home we had shared. I lifted out the medals, their ribbons faded, and underneath them was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My breath caught. It wasn't a casual note, it was sealed. And on the front, in my husband's steady, familiar cursive, was my name, Evelyn. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. David had been gone for 3 years. This letter had been sitting here, silent and patient, waiting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp, and the ink was a deep, unfaded black. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I can only hope that you are finding your way through the world without me. I am so sorry to have left you. That is a regret I will take with me wherever I go. I am writing this because I have to. There is a weight on my soul, a worry for you that I cannot shake. I have watched our son grow. I have seen the brilliant, driven man he has become, and I am proud. But I have also seen a change in him, a hardening around the edges that frightens me. He has a hunger for success that is all-consuming, and Olivia, she is more ambitious than both of us combined. I see the way they look at the world, the way they look at you, with a kind of loving, dismissive condescension. They love you, I know, but they see you as a relic of a simpler world, not as a player in their own. Perhaps I am just a paranoid old man, but love for me was always about protection, and I cannot leave you unprotected. 2 years ago, I established a private trust in your name. It is separate from my life insurance, separate from our shared estate. It is yours and yours alone. I funded it with the sale of my early stock options from my time at the firm, the ones I never told you I kept. Our old lawyer and friend, Jonathan Albright, is the executor. He knows my wishes. The total value should be just over $10 million. I stopped reading. The number didn't compute. 10 million. I read the sentence again. The paper shook in my hands. It wasn't possible. We had lived comfortably, but we were not people of that kind of wealth. David had always been modest, careful. I know you are probably in shock, the letter continued as if he could see me across time. I kept this from you for a reason. I knew you. In your beautiful, selfless heart, would have wanted to pour it all into Mason's company. But this money is not for his dream, Evelyn. It is for yours. It is your safety net, your independence, your freedom. It is the guarantee that you will never have to depend on the kindness or the charity of anyone else for the rest of your life. They will see it as a resource, but you must see it as a declaration of independence. Please, my love, do not let them manage you. Do not let them make you feel small. You were a brilliant scientist before you were a mother. You were a passionate, curious woman before you were a wife. Go and be her again. Live your life, Evelyn. It's time. Forever yours, David. A sob escaped my lips, a raw, ragged sound that came from the deepest part of me. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, clutching the letter to my chest. The tears finally came, a flood I had held back for what felt like an eternity. But these were not the tears of a victim. They were not tears of heartbreak or humiliation. They were tears of profound, soul-shaking relief. In his death, My husband had seen me more clearly than my own son saw me in life. David had known. He had anticipated the invisible cracks, the potential for this exact betrayal, and he had built me a fortress. He had left me not just money, but a validation of my fears and a confirmation of my worth. He had left me a weapon. I cried until there were no tears left, until the raw ache in my chest subsided into a familiar, quiet strength. I washed my face in the bathroom, looking at my own reflection in the mirror. The puffy, red-rimmed eyes of a grieving woman were gone. In their place was the cool, steady gaze of Dr. Evelyn Reed. The long night was over. My period of mourning for my husband, for the son I thought I had, for the life I had known, was officially done. I walked back into the study, the letter in my hand, and picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past the name Mason, and found the number for Jonathan Albright's law firm. The fury was still there, but it was no longer a wild fire. It was a forge, and I was ready to build. Dawn broke not with a gentle blush, but with a sharp, silver light that sliced through the blinds, striping the floor of my study. I had been sitting in the dark for hours, David's letter lying open on the desk before me like a sacred text. The house was still, but my mind was a whirlwind of activity, plotting, calculating, and for the first time in years, thinking entirely about my own preservation. The woman who had wept with relief was gone, replaced by the woman who held the letter. She was a different creature entirely. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a small, steadying anchor in a world that had come unmoored. The aroma filled the kitchen, but it wasn't a scent of comfort, it was the smell of fuel. I drank it black, standing by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. They thought they had left me in the dark, but they had forgotten that I was a scientist. I had spent my entire career in the dark, searching for patterns, for truth, for the single, elegant solution that explained the chaos. And now I had found it. At precisely 8:30 a.m., I dialed the number for Albright and Cho. I expected to be put on hold to navigate a labyrinth of receptionists and paralegals. But when I gave my name, Evelyn Reed, a friend of the late David Reed, the woman's voice on the other end softened. "One moment, Dr. Reed." Less than 10 seconds later, a warm, slightly gravelly voice came on the line. "Evelyn, my dear, I must admit I have been waiting for this call for 3 years. Jonathan Albright. He had been David's closest friend since law school, a man whose kindness was matched only by his formidable intellect. Hearing his voice was like hearing an echo from a better time. "Jonathan," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. "I found David's letter." I heard him let out a long, slow breath. "Thank God," he said simply. He was so worried, Evelyn. In those last few months, it was all he could talk about. He saw the way the wind was blowing with Mason. He called it ruthless ambition. He just wanted to make sure you had a damn fortress to stand in when the storm finally came. His words were a bomb. It was real. I wasn't grieving or overreacting. David, the most rational man I knew, had seen it too. "The storm is here, Jonathan," I said. I told him everything: the dinner at the summit, the words unnecessary expense, the senior community in New Jersey. I recounted the story not with the quavering voice of a victim, but with the cool precision of a scientist presenting her findings. I stated the facts, the data points of my own humiliation. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "That boy," he finally said, his voice tight with a quiet fury that mirrored my own, "has his father's ambition but none of his heart. Very well." David's instructions were quite clear in this event. "The trust is yours, liquid and entirely under your control. But before we get to that, we need to stop the bleeding. Tell me about the acquisition. How is Mason managing the initial cash flow?" I explained what little I knew, that the initial funds from Gen Pharma, a multi-million-dollar preliminary payment, were being held in a joint operating account until Mason's new corporate accounts were finalized. He had set it up that way for flexibility, and he'd put my name on it, he'd said, just in case of an emergency. Jonathan was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears of his brilliant legal mind turning. "An emergency," he mused, a hint of steel in his voice. "I believe we have one. Evelyn, is your name listed as a primary or secondary account holder?" Primary, I said. He needed my credit history to secure the account without a waiting period. Oh, Mason, Jonathan whispered, and it was the sound of a chess master spotting a fatal blunder. He's given us the key. We don't need to fight him for control of his company. We just need to interrupt his cash flow. A temporary interruption is all it will take to bring him to the table. He laid out the plan. It was simple, legal, and devastatingly effective. I'm going to conference in my contact at the bank, the head of private wealth management. I will be on the line with you, but you will be the one to speak. You are a primary account holder reporting suspicious activity. Those are the magic words. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage. This was the point of no return. A moment later, a crisp, professional voice joined the call. Mr. Albright, how can I help you? Richard, thank you for taking my call, Jonathan said smoothly. I have my client, Dr. Evelyn Reed, on the line. She is a primary holder on account number 774B. She has some concerns she needs to address with you directly. I took a deep breath. Mr. Davies, I began, my voice clear and firm, the voice I used to use when lecturing a hall of first-year medical students. It's Dr. Reed. I'm calling because I have reason to believe my account is being compromised. I've noted several potential irregularities, and I suspect unauthorized fund movements are imminent. As per the account holder agreement, I am requesting an immediate administrative freeze on all outgoing transfers, pending a full review by my legal counsel, Mr. Albright. There was a pause and the sound of typing. The bank manager knew Jonathan Albright by reputation. He wasn't about to question a request that was delivered with such authority. I see Dr. Reed. Legal counsel, you say? I can certainly place a temporary hold. It will be in effect for 72 business hours, pending official documentation from your attorney. Can you confirm the last 4 digits of your social security number? I confirmed them. Very well, he said. The administrative freeze is now in effect. All parties on the account will be notified. Thank you, I said, and a quiet, profound calm washed over me. Jonathan and I sat in silence until the bank manager disconnected. The first move has been made, Evelyn, Jonathan said softly. The hornet's nest has been well and truly kicked. Be ready. I'm ready, I replied. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the street. A new day had begun. For them, it would be a day of chaos, confusion, and dawning panic. For me, it was the first day of my new life. I was no longer a liability on their spreadsheet. I was the one who controlled the ledger. There is a unique and profound silence that follows a declaration of war. It is the quiet hum after the bomb has been dropped, but before the shock wave has hit. I spent the morning in that silence. I made a pot of tea, the expensive Earl Grey I never drank because Mason found the scent of bergamot too strong. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one David always used to sit in, and opened a book on cellular biology I had bought months ago but had never found the time or perhaps the will to read. I was not waiting, not exactly. Waiting implies anxiety, a nervous anticipation of a coming event. This was different. This was an observation. I had introduced a new variable into a stable, if toxic, ecosystem. Now, as a scientist, I was simply waiting to observe the results. My phone, which I had placed face up on the coffee table, was the Petri dish. It took longer than I expected, 3 hours. It told me that their first assumption would have been a simple bank error, a technical glitch. They would have spent hours on the phone with customer service representatives, their frustration mounting with each canned, unhelpful response. The thought brought me no joy, but it brought me no pain either. It was simply data. At 12:15 p.m., the Petri dish came to life. A single text message from Mason. Mom, something weird is going on with the operating account. The transfer for the penthouse deposit was just declined. Call me? It was a command, not a request. The old Evelyn would have felt a surge of panic, a frantic need to fix whatever was wrong to smooth his path. My finger would have been dialing his number before I had even finished reading the message. I did nothing. I took a slow sip of my tea and turned a page in my book. I let the message sit there, a blue, unanswered beacon of his dawning confusion. 15 minutes later, the phone rang. Mason's name flashed on the screen. I watched it ring, the vibration a low hum against the wood of the table. I let it go to voicemail. I needed him to understand that the rules of engagement had changed. Access to me was no longer a given. A minute later, it rang again. This time, I answered on the third ring. "Hello?" I said, my voice even and calm. "What the hell is going on?" He exploded, foregoing any greeting. There was a frantic, ragged edge to his voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager who had dented my car. "I've been on the phone with the bank for 2 hours. They're saying there's an administrative freeze on the account. They said you placed it. You need to call them back and fix this right now." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, listening to his panic as if it were a weather report. "I'm not sure what there is to fix, Mason." "What do you mean you're not sure? They said you called. The deposit for our new place, Mom. It's gone. We could lose it." Olivia is freaking out. "This is a multi-million-dollar deal on the line. And you're playing games?" "It's not a game," I said, and my voice was so cold it surprised even me. I was alerted to several significant financial discrepancies in the account. Given the circumstances, my advisor and I felt it was prudent to protect my assets until a full review could be completed. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I had just deployed a vocabulary he never thought I possessed. Discrepancies, advisor, assets. Advisor. He finally stammered. "What advisor? You don't have an advisor." "I do now," I said simply. "Jonathan Albright." The silence that followed was heavier, deeper. He knew the name. Albright had been our family's shadow counsel for decades, David's confidant. The implication was clear: this wasn't just me. This was an organized, strategic move. "Albright?" His voice was a whisper now, the anger replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "Why would you, Mom? What is this about? Is this about the dinner? We said we were sorry if you felt left out." If I felt left out, the blame was still being placed on my feelings, not their actions. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details of the review over the phone, Mason," I said, using the exact professional tone Jonathan had coached me to use. "Mr. Albright is handling everything. I will be in touch when there is something to report." "No, you don't get to do that," he said, his voice rising again, a desperate attempt to regain control. "You don't understand the trouble you're causing. You could jeopardize everything I've worked for." "That is an interesting choice of words," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Mason." I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady. For the first time in 30 years, I had hung up on my son. The second wave came almost immediately, but from a different front. My phone lit up with a fusillade of texts from Olivia. "Evelyn, Mason just told me what you did. Is everything okay? We're so worried about you. This is a simple misunderstanding, I'm sure. Please just call the bank back. You're scaring Mason. I don't know why you're doing this, but it's incredibly destructive. You're hurting your son over some perceived slight. This is so selfish, Evelyn, after everything we've done to include you." The final text was the one that made me smile, a thin, mirthless smile. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. I read it, then calmly powered my phone off. The silence that returned to the apartment was absolute. The storm was raging outside, but inside my fortress all was calm. I had built a firewall. They could send their angry messages, their panicked calls, their attempts at emotional blackmail, but none of it could get through. They had managed me, handled me, and simplified me for years. Now they were faced with a version of me they couldn't comprehend. The quiet hum was gone. The engine was running. And I was the one at the controls. The silence from my powered-off phone lasted for 3 days. It was a silence of my own choosing, a deliberate and necessary act of severing. In those 3 days, the frantic energy of my initial counterattack settled into a deep, abiding calm. I was no longer a reactor, an emotional pinball ricocheting off the cruelty of others. I was a planner, an architect, and I needed to design a new life. My first meeting with Jonathan Albright took place in his office, a sanctuary of mahogany, leather-bound books, and quiet dignity. The air smelled of old paper and justice. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of the summit, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt grounded. "They are in a state of complete panic," Jonathan said, a grim satisfaction in his voice as he steepled his fingers. I have received no less than 10 calls from 2 different law firms Mason has hired. They are alternating between threats of legal action for malicious interference and desperate pleas for negotiation. I have, of course, responded to none of them. We let them stew in the uncertainty they created. Good, I said. The word was solid, a stone in my mouth. Jonathan leaned forward, his kind, shrewd eyes meeting mine. David didn't leave you this money so you could win a war with Mason, Evelyn. He left it so you could build a life. The war is merely the demolition phase. Now, we must talk about the reconstruction. You cannot stay in that apartment. It is a mausoleum. He was right. The apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was the scene of the crime, a place haunted by the ghost of a mother I no longer was. David and I once talked about buying a brownstone in Brooklyn. I said, the memory surfacing, clear and sharp. He loved the idea of a small garden, a real neighborhood. But Mason was starting high school in Manhattan, and we chose the better school district over our own dream. Another sacrifice, I realized, on a mountain of them. Then that is where we shall start, Jonathan declared. The next week was a whirlwind, but one I was in control of. Jonathan connected me with a real estate agent, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah, who understood immediately that I was not looking for a property, but a future. We didn't look at sterile glass penthouses with panoramic views of a city I no longer felt a part of. Sarah took me across the bridge to tree-lined streets in Park Slope and Cobble Hill. I knew it the moment I saw it. It was a 4-story brownstone, its red brick facade framed by the lush green of a climbing wisteria. It was old, dignified, and a little bit worn, but it had what my Manhattan high-rise lacked: character, a soul. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the original hardwood floors. There were built-in bookshelves that reached to the high ceilings, a fireplace in the living room, and a small, overgrown garden in the back, bathed in the afternoon sun. It had a room on the 3rd floor with a bay window that was perfect for a study. I'll take it, I said to Sarah, standing in the middle of the sun-drenched garden. My decision was not emotional or impulsive, it was a statement of fact. This was my place. I made an all-cash offer that afternoon, using the first disbursement from David's trust. While the lawyers handled the closing, I began another, more important, kind of reconstruction. I sat at the kitchen table in the mausoleum, a pen and a notepad in front of me, and I made a list. Not of things to pack, but of people to find. The names came slowly at first, ghosts from a life I'd put in storage. Dr. Anya Sharma, my brilliant and hilarious former colleague at the university, with whom I'd lost touch after I took early retirement. Lena Petrova, the fiery Russian woman from my old book club who read Tolstoy in the original and drank vodka with her tea. Michael, the owner of the small jazz club in the village I used to frequent with David. For years, my social life had revolved around Mason, his school functions, his sporting events, his parent-teacher conferences. I had let my own friendships wither from neglect. The thought of reaching out now, after so many years of silence, filled me with a strange trepidation. What would I say? I decided to start with Anya. I dialed her number, my heart beating a little too fast. She answered on the second ring. Anya Sharma. Anya, I said, my voice a little rusty. It's Evelyn, Evelyn Reed. There was a moment of stunned silence and then a delighted shriek. Evelyn, my God, I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Where have you been? It's a long story, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. A story I'd love to tell you over coffee if you have the time. Time? She boomed. For you, my friend, I will clear the calendar. How about tomorrow? The conversation was effortless, a piece of music I had forgotten I knew how to play. We talked for an hour, and I felt a part of my brain, a part that had been dormant for a decade, light up again. After I hung up, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with revenge or power. It was connection. I made the other calls. Each one was met with the same surprise, the same warmth, the same immediate desire to reconnect. My calendar, once a barren landscape of doctor's appointments and reminders for Mason's birthday, began to fill. Coffee with Anya, a lecture on astrophysics Michael had tickets for, a meeting of Lena's book club. They were reading a new biography of Marie Curie. A week later, I stood in the empty living room of my new brownstone. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The closing had been finalized that morning. The house was mine. The silence was different here. It wasn't the sterile, lonely silence of the apartment. This was a silence of possibility, a blank page waiting to be written on. I walked to the back of the house and opened the doors to the garden. It was a beautiful mess of weeds and untamed rose bushes. I stepped out onto the stone patio, breathing in the scent of damp earth and green things. It needed work. It needed care and attention. It needed someone to cultivate it to help it grow. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I had found my new project. The weeks that followed were a quiet renaissance. The Brooklyn brownstone, which had at first felt like a vast and empty vessel, began to fill, not just with furniture, a comfortable reading chair upholstered in deep blue velvet, a sturdy oak table for the dining room, shelves upon shelves for my books, but with life. Mornings were for my garden. I found a surprising, almost primitive satisfaction in plunging my hands into the cool earth, in pulling up stubborn weeds and planting the seeds of something new. Afternoons were for my mind. I spent hours in my sunlit study, rediscovering the rhythms of research, the thrill of intellectual pursuit. My friendship with Anya was rekindled as if no time had passed at all. We met for coffee twice a week, our conversations a rapid-fire exchange of ideas about particle physics, university politics, and the simple, absurd joys of growing older. Lena dragged me back into the book club, and I found myself once again debating literature with a fierce passion I thought had long since been extinguished. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my son's ambitions, was expanding again, becoming vibrant, colorful, and entirely my own. Jonathan Albright handled the legal front with the silent efficiency of a master strategist. He informed me that Mason had retained a high-powered corporate law firm, whose aggressive, threatening letters Jonathan treated with what he called contemptuous silence. The funds remained frozen. The pressure was building. I knew with the certainty of a gathering storm that they would find me. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, covered in flour, attempting a sourdough starter for the first time. The sound was jarring, an alien intrusion into the peaceful bubble I had so carefully constructed. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the front hall, my heart a steady, even beat. I glanced at the small video screen connected to the entryway. And there they were. They looked like ghosts from another life. Mason's expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, desperate tension in his shoulders. Olivia stood beside him, her perfectly composed mask showing visible cracks. Her designer handbag was clutched in her hands like a shield, and the dark circles under her eyes were too deep for even her expert makeup to conceal. They looked diminished, washed out against the solid, unforgiving oak of my front door. I did not feel a flicker of pity. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical observation. My experiment was yielding results. I pressed the intercom button. Yes, my voice was calm, a stranger's voice. Mason flinched, startled. Mom, it's me, it's Mason. Can we please come in? We need to talk to you. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I considered saying no, considered not opening the door at all, but I knew this was a necessary step. This was a battle that had to be fought face to face. The door is unlocked, I said and clicked off the intercom. I did not wait for them in the living room. I did not offer them a seat or a glass of water. I stood in the middle of the grand entryway, my arms crossed, forcing them to meet me on this neutral ground. My house, my terms. They stepped inside, their eyes wide as they took in the space. The high ceilings, the restored moldings, the light pouring in from the garden. They were seeing a life they had no part in, a world of substance and taste that they had assumed I was incapable of possessing. Mason spoke first, his voice strained, attempting a humility that sat on him as awkwardly as a borrowed coat. Mom, I am so sorry for everything. The dinner, the things I said, I was wrong. We were wrong. Olivia, ever the performer, stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Evelyn, she began, her voice trembling artfully, we've made a terrible, terrible mistake. We were under so much pressure with the deal, we weren't thinking clearly. We never ever meant to hurt you. It was a masterful performance. The choreography of their apology was flawless, but I was no longer a willing member of the audience. I had read the script, I had seen the stage directions. I let the silence hang in the air after their apologies, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I simply looked at them, my expression unreadable. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. The question seemed to throw them. They had expected absolution, or at least an emotional reaction, anger, tears, something they could work with, something they could manage. My calm detachment was a wall they hadn't anticipated. "We came to apologize," Mason said, a note of his old frustration creeping back into his voice. And to ask you to please call the bank. Mom, you don't understand. The entire deal is about to collapse. The buyers are getting nervous. They're talking about breach of contract. Everything I've worked for, everything we worked for, is going to disappear if you don't undo this." There it was, the truth, tucked neatly behind a flimsy, manufactured apology. I looked from my son's desperate face to his fiance's carefully tear-streaked cheeks, and I felt a profound, almost serene sense of clarity. "You are not here because you are sorry you hurt me," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it filled the cavernous entryway. "You are here because you are afraid. You are here because your money is trapped, and you believe I am the only one with the key. Your apology is not an act of remorse. It is a business tactic." "That's not true," Olivia gasped, placing a hand over her heart as if I had physically wounded her. "Isn't it?" I replied, my gaze fixed on Mason. "You didn't come here the day after the dinner. You didn't come when you thought I was a heartbroken old woman with no resources and nowhere to go. You came here now, weeks later, when your penthouse deposit was declined and your world started to fall apart. Your sorrow isn't for me, it's for yourselves." Mason was speechless. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, seeing for the first time not his soft, pliable mother, but a stranger, a formidable one. I took a step toward the door, a clear dismissal. "This conversation is over. My lawyer, Mr. Albright, will be in touch with your lawyers to schedule a formal meeting to discuss the assets. We have nothing more to say to each other here." I opened the heavy door. The afternoon light spilled in, outlining their defeated postures. They hesitated, looking back at me one last time, searching for a crack in my resolve. For the mother they thought they knew, they found nothing. I watched them walk down the steps of my brownstone, two well-dressed refugees from a kingdom of their own making. Then I closed the door, the solid, definitive click of the lock echoing in the hall. I leaned against the cool wood for a moment, my back to the world they inhabited, and faced the light-filled life that was now mine. The desperate plea had been made, and it had failed. The day of the meeting, I chose my clothes like a general choosing armor for a decisive battle. There were no soft silks or gentle plums. I wore a charcoal gray pantsuit with sharp, clean lines, a crisp white blouse, and a single understated piece of jewelry. A silver brooch David had given me, shaped like a compass. It felt appropriate. I was, at last, navigating by my own true north. Jonathan Albright's conference room was on the 50th floor of a building in Midtown, and it was designed to communicate one thing: unshakable power. The table was a single, massive slab of polished mahogany that reflected the grim skyline like a dark mirror. The leather chairs were imposing. The air was still and cool. This was not a place for emotional appeals or family drama. This was a place where fortunes were decided. I arrived 20 minutes early. Jonathan and I sat side by side, a silent, united front, reviewing the file he had prepared. It was thick, meticulously organized, and devastating in its simple, factual clarity. At precisely 10 a.m., they were shown in. Mason and Olivia were followed by a man who looked like he had been genetically engineered in a lab for corporate litigation. He was young, sharp, with an expensive suit and a smile that was all teeth. He radiated an aggressive confidence that was the last bastion of the world they were trying to cling to. "Mr. Albright, Dr. Reed," he began, extending a hand that I did not take. "I'm Julian Croft. I trust we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding quickly and amicably." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Croft," Jonathan said, his voice calm and resonant, cutting through the younger man's bluster. and we are not here to negotiate. We are here to inform your clients of the terms under which Dr. Reed will agree not to pursue further legal action. Croft's smile tightened. He had come for a fight and found himself at a surrender. Mason and Olivia sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on the gleaming surface of the table, refusing to look at me. Jonathan slid a leather-bound folder across the table. It landed in front of Mr. Croft with a soft, definitive thud. "You will find in this file," Jonathan began, "a complete and documented history of financial transfers from Dr. Reed to your client, Mr. Reed, and his startup, Aura Health, over the past 5 years. It begins with the initial $50,000 transfer from her savings account. It continues with the $200,000 from the sale of a private art collection inherited from her father, the $400,000 from the liquidation of her retirement portfolio, and culminates in the final $300,000 from the sale of her parents' estate. The total comes to $950,000. It is all there. Dates, transfers, receipts." Croft opened the file, his confident expression faltering slightly as he scanned the first few pages of undeniable proof. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the room. I did not look at the lawyers. I looked only at my son. "That was not just money, Mason," I said, my tone cool and evidentiary. "The art collection was my father's legacy. The house was my childhood. The retirement fund was the future David and I had planned together, a future of travel and research and quiet days by the sea. It was the entirety of my past and the whole of my security. I converted it all into cash and handed it to you." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the silent room. Olivia shifted in her chair, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Mason remained perfectly still, a statue of a son. "I did it gladly," I continued, "because I believed I was investing in my family's future. I did not ask for contracts or stock options because I believed in you. But it seems that while I was liquidating my life for your dream, you and Olivia were busy discussing the best way to manage me." At that, I slid a single sheet of paper from my own folder. It was a printed transcript of their most damning text messages, the ones I had discovered on the iPad. I pushed it across the table. It stopped directly in front of Mason. He flinched as if the paper were hot. Olivia let out a small, sharp gasp. Their lawyer, Mr. Croft, leaned over to read it, and for the first time, the aggressive confidence completely vanished from his face. He looked at his clients with a flash of undisguised fury. They had not told him the whole truth. They had walked him into an ambush. Jonathan Albright chose that moment to deliver the final blow. "Dr. Reed has no desire to become a shareholder in Aura Health," he said, his voice like velvet-trapped steel. "She has no interest in participating in your future. She is, however, entitled to restitution. She is claiming her principal investment of $950,000. In addition, she is claiming punitive damages for breach of familial trust, emotional distress, and opportunity cost, which we have calculated at a conservative $4,050,000. "That's outrageous," Croft sputtered, regaining some of his composure. "The total is $5 million, Jonathan stated, ignoring him completely. "It is not a request. It is the price to have the administrative freeze on the account lifted. You will find a settlement agreement in the file. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to sign it and wire the funds. If you do not, at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, we will be filing a lawsuit for fraud and elder financial abuse. And we will, of course, be forwarding a copy of this entire file to the acquisitions board at Gen Pharma. I'm sure they would be most interested in the character and ethical standing of their new partners." It was checkmate. The room was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of the city outside. I stood up, followed by Jonathan. The meeting was over. We had not raised our voices. We had not engaged in threats. We had simply presented the truth. "It was never about the money, Mason," I said, my final words to him as I stood by the door. "It was about the fact that you thought my life's work was a gift you were entitled to, and that my heart was an expense you could afford to cut." I walked out of that room without looking back. I didn't need to see the look on his face. I didn't need to hear their frantic whispers. I had taken the ledger they had used to dismiss me, and I had balanced it. Walking out of Jonathan Albright's office was like stepping from a pressurized cabin into the open air. The city noise, the hurried rhythm of the streets, the indifferent faces of the passers-by, it all seemed muted, distant. The battle was over. There was no elation, no surge of triumphant joy. There was only the quiet, heavy finality of a necessary amputation. I had saved the body, but I had lost the limb. And even if the limb was diseased, you still feel the phantom ache where it used to be. Jonathan walked me down to the lobby, his hand resting gently on my elbow, a small, grounding gesture of support. "You were magnificent in there, Evelyn," he said softly. I was a plaintiff stating her case. I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "No," he corrected. "You were a mother teaching her son the true meaning of cost." We said our goodbyes on the sun-drenched sidewalk, and I took a taxi back to Brooklyn, back to my fortress, my sanctuary. I spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet suspension. I did not check my email. I did not turn on my phone. I worked in my garden, pulling weeds with a methodical focus, my mind blessedly, wonderfully blank. I was letting the silence heal the space where the noise used to be. The confirmation arrived the next day, not with a frantic call, but with the quiet dignity of a formal email from Jonathan. The subject line was a single word, resolved. Evelyn, the body of the message read, the signed agreement was received at 9:15 a.m. The wire transfer of $5 million was confirmed by the bank at 2:42 p.m. It is done. The administrative freeze has been lifted. I suggest we meet next week to discuss investment strategies for the trust. Well done. Yours, Jonathan. I read the email twice. It was as clean and final as a death certificate. I closed my laptop. A part of my life was officially over. In the days that followed, a strange and unexpected emotion began to surface: grief. Not the raw, shocking grief of that night at the summit, but a deeper, more ancient sorrow. I grieved for the little boy with scraped knees who used to run to me for comfort. I grieved for the earnest college student who used to call me after every exam. I grieved for the man he might have become if he had not been consumed by his own ambition. I grieved for the family I thought I had, a fiction I had curated with my own love and sacrifice. One afternoon, I unpacked the box labeled his, the one containing the photos from the apartment. I spread them out on the floor of my study. There he was in all his stages of becoming, and in every single one I could see my own invisible hand: the neatly combed hair, the carefully chosen clothes, the proud, confident smile I had nurtured and paid for. I had given him the world, and he had, in the end, decided I was not fit to live in it. I looked at them for a long time, then I gathered them all up, put them back in the box, sealed it, and carried it down to the basement. Some histories are not meant to be displayed. They are lessons to be stored away in the dark. I never heard from them directly, but the aftershocks of their implosion reached me nonetheless. Jonathan informed me that the penthouse deal had, of course, collapsed. Sarah, my real estate agent, mentioned that a lavish wedding planned at the plaza had been abruptly canceled, the couple forfeiting a massive deposit. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I would allow myself to imagine the scene. I could see them, not in a grand penthouse, but in a small, sterile, rented apartment, the kind with beige walls and cheap fixtures. The dream had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter residue of reality. The air between them would be thick with blame. "You were supposed to handle her." I could hear Olivia's voice, sharp and venomous. "You told me she was emotional, that she was simple. You promised me a life, Mason. This isn't it." And Mason, his face pale with a fury born of failure and shame, would finally lash back. "Me? You were the one who couldn't stand her. You were the one who saw her as nothing more than a bank. Every upgrade, every designer dress, every five-star vacation we planned, it was all based on her money. You never saw her as my mother. You saw her as an obstacle to your perfect, curated life." And in the ensuing, ugly silence, I imagined a flicker of horrifying clarity in my son's eyes. The moment he realized that he had allowed Olivia's ambition to overwrite his own conscience. The moment he understood that in his desperate climb to the summit, he had cut the one rope that was holding him safely to the mountain. He had traded his foundation for a better view, and now he was in freefall. That imaginary scene brought me no comfort. It was just a sad, ugly postscript to a story that should have been beautiful. My healing was not in their ruin. My healing was here, in my house. It was in the first perfect loaf of sourdough I pulled from my oven. It was in the laughter I shared with Anya and Lena over a bottle of wine. It was in the quiet satisfaction of seeing the first roses bloom in my garden, their deep red petals a defiant splash of color against the old brick. The $5 million sat in a holding account, a silent testament to my victory. But the victory itself was not the money. The victory was the peace I felt as I sat in my study, the evening sun warming my face, a stack of scientific journals on my desk, and a jazz record playing softly on the stereo. The victory was that my happiness was no longer tied to my sons. The ledger was balanced. The accounts were closed. And I was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely, peacefully, and gloriously solvent in my own life. 6 months can feel like a lifetime or no time at all. For me, it was a season of quiet, steady growth. The wounds of the past had not vanished, but they had scarred over, turning from raw, open pains into pale, silver lines of experience. They were a part of my history, a map of where I had been, but they no longer dictated my direction. My new life, the one I was building brick by brick in the heart of Brooklyn, was defined not by what I had lost, but by what I was creating. The centerpiece of this new life was the David Reed Grant for Women in Science. Using a significant portion of the trust, Jonathan and I had established a foundation in my late husband's name. Its mission was simple and deeply personal: to provide funding for brilliant female scientists who were at a crossroads, the very crossroads I had faced 30 years ago, where they felt they had to choose between their research and their families. It was my way of honoring David's protective love, and of reclaiming the part of myself I had sacrificed for a dream that was not my own. The launch event was not held in a grand ballroom, but in the warm, book-lined living room of my brownstone. It was filled not with corporate sponsors and strangers, but with the people who had become the pillars of my new world. Anya was there, raising a glass of champagne with a proud, beaming smile. Lena was debating passionately with a young physicist, one of our first grant recipients. My garden, now thriving under my care, was visible through the open doors, its late summer roses a riot of defiant color. Standing in the center of that room, surrounded by intelligent conversation and genuine laughter, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it almost brought me to tears. This was a celebration not of a financial windfall, but of a purpose rediscovered. This was my summit. The true measure of my new life, however, came on a quiet Thursday morning, tucked inside a stack of mail. It was a single, plain envelope with my name and address written in a hand I knew as well as my own. Mason's. There was no return address. My heart did not leap with anxiety or anger. There was only a calm, weary curiosity. I slit the envelope open with a butter knife and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was not a demand or an excuse. It was, I realized after the first few sentences, a confession. "Mom," it began, "I don't know if you'll even read this, and I don't blame you if you don't. I don't have the right to ask for your time, let alone your forgiveness. I am writing this for me, I think, to put the words on paper that I was too cowardly and too arrogant to say to you in person. I was a fool, there is no other word for it. I let greed and ambition consume me, and I let Olivia convince me that your love was just another resource to be managed. I traded my mother for a balance sheet, and it was the worst deal I have ever made in my life. The acquisition went through, but everything else fell apart. Olivia and I are no longer together. Our relationship, I see now, was just another transaction, and when the value plummeted, we had nothing left to hold on to. I lost the penthouse, the big plans, the life I thought I wanted. But the truth is, I had lost everything that mattered long before that. I lost it on a Tuesday night in a restaurant when I laughed at your pain. I am working a regular job now. I am in therapy. I am trying to figure out how to be a man my father would not have been ashamed of. I am trying to become someone worthy of the sacrifices you made for me. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it all now. I see you. I am so sorry. Mason. I read the letter twice. The boy who had written it was not the cold CEO from the restaurant, nor was he the desperate stranger who had shown up at my door. He sounded like someone I had once known, a long time ago. A year ago, this letter would have been everything. It would have been the key to my happiness, the validation I so desperately craved. I would have called him, wept with him, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding would have begun. But as I sat there in my sunlit study, I realized something profound. His redemption was no longer necessary for my peace. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a small wooden box on my desk, alongside a few of David's old things. It was a part of my story, but it was not the final chapter. The final chapter was this. It was the quiet hum of a house filled with books and music. It was the joy of a thriving garden. It was the laughter of friends around my dinner table. It was the deep, unshakable knowledge that my worth was inherent, not something to be bestowed upon me by my children or by anyone else. I had been given a second chance at life, not by the money, but by the truth of who I was and the truth of what I deserved. I had learned that family is not always about the blood you share, but about the people who show up for you, who see you, who honor the space you hold in the world. My son was on his own journey now, a journey back to himself. I wished him well, but my journey was here. My future was my own, a blank page on which I could write anything I chose. And I chose peace. I chose joy. I chose to live.